A 16-year-old black boy stands trial for a crime he didn't commit, just like his father, who was wrongfully convicted 6 years ago. But this time, the boy has a plan. He's not just here to defend himself. He's here to make the court finally listen. Can one voice, armed with the truth, break through a system built to silence it? If this story moves you, please like the video and subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. Now, let me take you inside a courtroom where a boy dared to speak the truth and shook the system to its core. The courtroom was quiet that morning, too quiet, like the air knew something was about to happen, something it couldn't prepare for. They brought Jamal in wearing a gray hoodie, 2 sizes too small, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. He was 16, thin, tall, sharper in the eyes than most boys his age, but with wrists too small for the cold metal cuffs digging into them. To the bailiff, he was just another black kid with attitude. To the white couple who called the cops, he was a suspicious presence sitting too long on the steps of a vacant house. To the police, he fit the description. What description? Young, black, alone, in the wrong neighborhood. What they didn't care to ask was, why was he doing? Because the truth was too ordinary to fit the story they wanted. He was reading. That's it. Just sitting on a crumbling porch, flipping through a worn paperback. To Kill a Mockingbird, of all things. But in that zip code, in that skin, doing even that was apparently a crime. They didn't let him explain. Didn't ask what book he was reading, or why his backpack had school papers instead of stolen goods. They just pressed his face against the hood of the car, cuffed him, and told him he'd have to answer for trespassing. And now, here he was, standing in a courtroom built on polished wood and double standards. His public defender hadn't even looked him in the eye yet. Just skimmed the file, mumbled something about just plead out and go home, then went back to tapping at his phone. But Jamal wasn't going to plead guilty to something he didn't do. Not again. Not like his father had, 6 years ago. The judge hadn't entered the room yet. The room was still buzzing with whispers, papers shuffling, the usual sound of people preparing to ignore the truth. Jamal didn't speak, but his eyes did. They scanned the faces in the gallery, the jury box, the empty chair behind the bench, and quietly they asked, if I were white, would I even be here? When Judge Paul Harding walked into a courtroom, everything seemed to fall silent, out of respect or out of fear. Maybe both. He wore that black robe like it was armor. Impeccable posture, measured steps, not a single smile in sight. For over 2 decades, Judge Harding had built a reputation that preceded him. Tough but fair. That's what they called him in the papers. The Iron Hand of Justice, local media once said. To some, he was a hero. To others, a symbol of how justice could be cold, distant, and blind. His record was clean, no scandal, no questions. Every sentence he gave with confidence. But Jamal wasn't looking at a symbol. He was looking at a man. The moment Harding entered, Jamal's eyes locked onto him, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact second. And when Harding took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the case file in front of him, he didn't notice the way Jamal was staring. But the bailiff did. So did a reporter in the back row. There was something in that boy's eyes. Not fear, not defiance. It was something else. Recognition. Harding flipped through the pages. Just another case. Just another name. Jamal Williams, age 16, charged with criminal trespassing in a private residential zone, he read aloud, voice firm, practiced, distant. He looked up. Their eyes met. Harding didn't flinch, but Jamal didn't blink. There was a long silence, one that stretched too far for a simple misdemeanor. Harding cleared his throat, raised the gavel slightly. Before we proceed with the plea, Jamal stood up. No warning, no permission. Just a 16-year-old boy with handcuffs still biting at his wrists, rising slowly, steadily, like someone who no longer cared about the rules of the room. Do you remember Derek Williams? He asked, his voice low but clear. The courtroom rustled. Harding paused, squinted slightly. Excuse me? Jamal's voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it sliced. Derek Williams, my father. He took a breath. And then, you sent him to prison 6 years ago, and 2 years later he died in his cell. And you, his eyes locked on the judge again, you killed him with that. He pointed to the gavel. The sound that followed was silence, not the respectful kind, but the stunned, breathless kind. The kind that drapes itself over a room when something too true has just been said. The public defender froze. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered, unsure whether to keep typing. Harding said nothing. He just sat there, holding the gavel, mid-air, suddenly heavier than ever before. And Jamal? He didn't sit back down. He stood there. 16, cuffed, accused, and finally heard. You never forget the sound of a door being kicked in. Not when you're 10 years old. Not when the man behind it is your father. It was past midnight when they came. Jamal still remembered the thud of boots on the porch, the pounding on the door, 3 quick hits that rattled the frame like it was made of paper. Then shouting. Then the front door exploding open like it owed someone something. His mother screamed. Not a scream of surprise, but of fear. The kind that only comes from someone who's been waiting for this night, dreading it, but powerless to stop it. Derek Williams. Hands where we can see them. Jamal stood at the top of the stairs, pajamas hanging loose on his small frame, frozen. He watched as the living room filled with uniforms, as his father raised his hands, confused, calm. There's been a mistake, his father said, voice steady. I haven't done anything. I've been home all night. They didn't care. They didn't check. They didn't ask. They cuffed him in front of his wife, in front of his son. Jamal remembered one moment more vividly than the rest. The moment his father turned back as they pushed him toward the door. He locked eyes with Jamal, standing halfway down the stairs, and he smiled. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he didn't want his boy to be. I'll be back soon, son, he said gently. I didn't do anything wrong. They'll see that. It'll be okay. That was the last thing he ever said to him. The door slammed shut. The house fell quiet. And Jamal stood there in the dark, gripping the handrail until his knuckles turned white. The days after that were a blur. His mother cried in silence, staring at walls that no longer felt like home. Bills piled up. The fridge got emptier. The phone rang less and less. When letters came from prison, she'd read them and fold them away without a word. Then one day, they stopped coming altogether. No warning, no reason. Just a call. One line. We regret to inform you. Jamal didn't understand how a man could go to jail alive and not come back. He asked questions. His mother had no answers, only silence, and one worn photograph of his father taped to the back of a closet door. They moved 5 times in the next 3 years, each move a little smaller, a little quieter. And in every place, Jamal would lie awake at night and whisper the only question that ever mattered. Why? No one ever answered. Not until today. There's something about old leather, that smell, that weight. It holds time like a secret. And when Jamal reached into his backpack and pulled out his father's journal, it wasn't just a prop. It was proof that truth still had a voice. He placed it gently on the defense table. The room quieted, not out of instruction but instinct. The judge leaned forward slightly. The clerk glanced up from her screen. Even the bailiff took a subtle step closer. Jamal rested his hand on the cover, like it was something sacred. His voice was soft, steady, but carried all the weight of the years he'd waited to speak. My father wrote this in prison. He didn't write it for lawyers or judges. He wrote it for me. No one's ever read it, until now. He flipped it open to a page marked by a folded corner, stained faintly at the edge, maybe water, maybe a tear. His eyes scanned the words, but you could tell he already knew them by heart. January 12th. They denied my appeal today, said the evidence wasn't new enough. How can it not be new if it was never seen? They never showed the security footage. Never called the neighbor who said it wasn't me. They don't want the truth. They want closure. They want a name to write down. And I was that name. A ripple of discomfort moved through the gallery. A woman in the second row shook her head. A reporter stopped typing, lowered her pen slowly. Jamal didn't pause. He turned the page. March 3rd. I try to stay strong for my son. I write him letters, tell him stories, pretend like I'm okay. But some nights, I press my hand to this cold wall and pretend it's his cheek. It helps me sleep. He closed the book halfway, took a breath, and looked up. Not at the judge this time, but at the room. He wrote that 6 weeks before he died. They said it was a fight, said he got into it with another inmate. But no one told us what really happened. They just sent us a box of his things and this journal. Jamal gently turned it to face the court. My mother never opened it. She couldn't. She said if she read his words, she'd break. So I waited. And when I was ready, I read every single page. It's all here. His pain, his hope, his innocence. He opened to the final entry, the paper softer from wear. I pray Jamal grows up knowing I loved him, that I didn't leave him, I was taken, and if he ever finds this, I hope he speaks louder than I ever could. The room was still. Not courtroom quiet, but soul quiet. The kind where even the air feels heavy with meaning. Someone sniffled near the back. The stenographer's hands hovered, frozen mid-air. Judge Harding shifted slightly in his chair, one hand on the bench, the other clenched out of sight. Jamal looked straight ahead, not pleading, not performing, just revealing. My dad was a man, not a file, not a number, not a case to be cleared, and he deserved to be heard. So today I'm making sure he is. He sat down without another word, and in that silence, it wasn't just his father who had spoken. It was every man, every woman, every child the system had forgotten. And for the first time in that courtroom, people listened. Judge Paul Harding had spent his entire life mastering the art of stillness. The robe, the bench, the gavel, it all gave him power. But power comes with weight, and today that weight was pressing down harder than it ever had before. He sat motionless behind the bench, the journal still open before him, though he wasn't reading it anymore. His hand rested on a silver pen, one he'd used to sign hundreds, no thousands of decisions. But now, that pen felt heavier than the gavel itself. He clenched it just to keep his hand from shaking. He could feel the eyes on him. The courtroom had fallen into a hush so complete it was as if the walls themselves were listening. And yet, it wasn't the silence outside that unsettled him. It was the one inside. Because something had cracked. Harding closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, he wasn't in the courtroom. He was back in his chambers, 6 years ago. A younger man, less gray at the temples, but already wearing the armor of confidence. The case file had been thin. No DNA, no fingerprints. Just a shaky witness report from someone who changed their story twice. And a defendant who looked exactly like the stereotype the public had already decided was guilty. Derek Williams, the file had read, male, African-American, prior misdemeanor, lives in a low-income area. The media was circling that case like vultures, pressure from the mayor's office, calls for swift justice, community leaders demanding answers, and the DA's office pushing for a conviction to set an example. Harding remembered asking, "Do we have enough?" And someone, he couldn't remember who, had said, "He fits the profile. The jury will buy it." He'd told himself it wasn't his job to question the system, just to enforce it. He told himself doubt is dangerous, that if they were wrong, the appeals court would catch it later. He signed the conviction. Now, years later, Harding sat on the same bench with that same pen, and a boy looking up at him with the same eyes as the man he once sent away. He stared at the journal again. Words written in ink by a man who had died believing no one would ever hear him. They don't want the truth. They want closure. Those words echoed in Harding's mind louder than any gavel he'd ever struck. For a moment, the judge looked like he might speak. He opened his mouth slightly, but nothing came out. Only breath. Shaky. Barely audible. Because how do you respond when the lie you built your career on just stood up in court and called you by name? Was it justice? Was it fear? Or was it simply easier to follow the tide than to stand against it? He looked down at the pen in his hand again, and for the first time in a long time he wasn't sure if he had the right to hold it. What is justice, he thought, if it requires a man to turn away from his own doubt? The courtroom waited. Jamal sat still, watching, and behind those sharp young eyes, Harding didn't just see a boy. He saw a mirror, a reflection of every choice he had made, and one he would have to make again, right now. Most boys at 11 are learning how to ride a bike with no hands or sneak snacks before dinner. Jamal was learning how to read legal transcripts and how to live without a father. When his dad died, Jamal didn't cry in public, not at the funeral, not when the box of his father's things arrived. Not when the news report aired for 20 seconds and then moved on to the next story. But that silence didn't mean he accepted it. It meant something else. He was already thinking. At 11, Jamal had no legal team, no guidance, no roadmap. But he had a question that wouldn't go away. Why? So he started with what he could control. Every week after school, while other kids were shooting hoops or playing video games, Jamal took the city bus to the downtown library. The first time he asked for court records, the clerk laughed, until Jamal handed over his father's full name, case number, and date of sentencing. He had memorized them. "You sure you want to read this, kid?" "I don't want to," Jamal answered. "I have to." He sat for hours at a dusty microfilm machine, scrolling through scan after scan of faded pages. He didn't understand all the legal terms at first, but he brought a dictionary with him. He wrote down words he didn't know and came back the next day with the definitions circled. By 12, Jamal was visiting the courthouse archives. Not many people noticed a skinny black boy sitting outside the records office every Saturday, politely asking retired clerks if they remembered anything about the Williams case. One man did, a retired assistant clerk named Mr. Dorsey. Gray suit, quiet voice, eyes that had seen too much. They sat on a bench one afternoon, sorting through old paper boxes. "You're serious about this?" Dorsey had said. Jamal nodded. "Because what they did to your father wasn't right." Mr. Dorsey didn't say much more, but he handed Jamal a folder, half-yellowed, edges torn, stamped exhibit not submitted. Inside was a witness statement from a man named Calvin Rhodes, a local handyman. White, middle-aged. He had been near the alleyway where the murder occurred, and he'd told police he saw someone leaving the scene, a tall white male with a shaved head and a limp. But Calvin's statement was never read in court. Never entered into the official trial record, and most telling of all, it had been marked irrelevant by the prosecutor. Jamal stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. "I told them it wasn't the guy they had, I told them, but they said I must have been confused." His hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity, because this was it. Not just a hole in the case, but a deliberate omission. Someone had made a choice to silence the one voice that could have cleared his father's name. At 13, Jamal copied that statement word for word into a notebook he kept under his mattress. At 14, he found a public records website that had archived articles from the trial and realized that Rhodes had tried to speak to the press but was discredited by the DA's office. At 15, Jamal called Calvin Rhodes himself. He was still alive, still in town, still willing to tell the truth. Some boys grow up playing detective. Jamal grew up being one. And now at 16, he sat in a courtroom, not just to defend himself from a crime he didn't commit, but to expose the one the system tried to erase. Some truths don't die, they wait. And sometimes the people who bury them leave someone behind who can dig them back up. Just when the courtroom seemed to settle, just when the silence after Jamal's revelations had stretched thin, a man stood from the back row. He looked to be in his early 50s, clean-cut, quiet, dressed like someone who didn't expect to speak, but had decided he couldn't leave without doing so. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Everyone turned. Even Harding looked startled, not just by the request, but by the man himself. The bailiff started to move, but the judge raised a hand. "State your name," Harding said, his voice cautious. "Mark Dalton. I'm the son of the late Chief Thomas Dalton, former sheriff of this county." That name sent a ripple through the room. A few heads turned sharply. Others whispered, "That Dalton?" beneath their breath. Mark reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn cassette tape and a typed transcript folded in thirds. He didn't approach the bench. He simply held it up, his voice steady. "Before my father passed, he left me this. Said it was something I needed to hear when I was ready. I listened to it 3 months ago, and after sitting here today, I think everyone needs to hear it too." The court clerk moved to take the tape and transcript. There was hesitation, but something in Mark's voice silenced resistance. The courtroom's audio system crackled softly as the old cassette began to play. The voice that came through was gravelly, weathered by time and years of command. "It was the Williams case. That boy, he didn't do it. I knew it. Hell, the whole damn station knew it. But the DA was under pressure. Press wanted a face. Community was furious. We didn't have a suspect, and the mayor's office was breathing down everyone's neck." There was a pause, a sigh. "We told ourselves, he had a record. It'll stick. We knew Rhodes saw someone else, but he wasn't a good witness to begin with. So we buried the statement, made sure the jury never heard it." And then the final line. Soft, hoarse, broken. "We shouldn't have pushed that case. That boy, he didn't do it. But when no one confesses, the court steps in and makes someone pay. And we made sure it wasn't us." The tape clicked off. No one moved. Jamal didn't blink. Judge Harding closed his eyes for the briefest second. Mark Dalton stepped back, voice quiet now. I never knew what kind of man my father really was, but I know this. A mistake is one thing. A choice, that's something else. He sat down. The room was stunned into stillness, not from disbelief, but from the sudden, sickening understanding that what had happened to Derek Williams wasn't an accident. It was policy. It was convenience. It was fear, wrapped in procedure. Jamal looked toward the bench. For the first time since this trial began, it wasn't just his voice carrying the weight of truth. Now, the system had started to speak against itself, and that made it impossible to ignore. Some cracks don't form in darkness. Sometimes they form right under the brightest lights, when the truth shines too hard on something built to look perfect. Judge Harding sat still, his hand hovering near the gavel. It was there, right where it always was, solid, simple, symbolic. He had struck that gavel thousands of times in his career, each time with confidence, each time with finality. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to lift it. Some cracks don't form in darkness. Sometimes they form right under the brightest lights, when the truth shines too hard on something built to look perfect. Judge Harding sat still, his hand hovering near the gavel. It was there, right where it always was, solid, simple, symbolic. He had struck that gavel thousands of times in his career, each time with confidence, each time with finality. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to lift it. His fingers curled around it briefly. Then slowly, almost reverently, he pulled it away and placed it down beside him. The room didn't breathe. He stood, not quickly, not with the posture of a man in charge, but with the slow, heavy movement of someone carrying something no one else could see. Then, in a move no one expected, he stepped down from the bench. He descended the short set of steps, each one sounding louder than it should have, and walked to the center of the courtroom, where Jamal sat. Jamal didn't flinch. He looked up, calm, collected, quiet. Harding stood before him. No robe could protect him now. For a moment, he said nothing. Then finally, with a voice that no longer sounded like a judge, but like a man, he spoke. I told myself that I did what was right, that the system wasn't broken, that we got it right. He swallowed hard. The courtroom was still, but I didn't get it right. I didn't even try. He looked down at Jamal, not with pity, not even apology at first, but with something deeper. Recognition. I let fear make decisions. I let public pressure become my compass, and I silenced every doubt I had because it was easier than admitting I might be wrong. A pause. But I was wrong. He stepped a little closer. Your father was not guilty. He was not a threat. He was not a case number. He was a man, a father, and he died because I didn't have the courage to listen. A hush spread across the gallery. You could hear someone sniffle. Another reach for a tissue. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from you. Not from anyone in this room. But I do owe you the truth. He looked around the courtroom, not as a judge, but as a man unraveling under the weight of his own silence. I sentenced your father with words I never truly believed. But hearing his voice today, hearing yours, that silence inside me finally broke. He looked back at Jamal. I'm sorry, son. I can't undo what I've done. But I see you, I hear you, and I promise, no one will ever silence your father's name again. Jamal didn't respond. He didn't nod. He didn't cry. He just stared. Eyes locked on the man who had once destroyed his world, now crumbling beneath the weight of the truth. In that moment, there were no roles, no judge, no defendant, just two men. One who had lost everything, and one who had finally realized it. And all around them, a courtroom full of people who would never see justice the same way again. There are moments in life when history doesn't just happen, it's rewritten. And sometimes the pen that signs a new beginning is held by the same hand that once caused the pain. Judge Harding stood still for a long time after his apology. Not out of fear, not out of pride, but out of something heavier, accountability. Then slowly, without being asked, without waiting for protocol, he turned, walked back to the bench, and reached for a document on the clerk's table. It was already there, a form no judge likes to use, but one that exists for moments like this. Petition to reopen case, Derek Williams. The courtroom held its breath. Harding read it quietly, though he didn't need to. He knew every word by heart. He had read it 6 years ago, and rejected it. But now, with hands that no longer trembled, he picked up his pen. The same one he had used to sign the sentencing order all those years ago. and this time he signed something else. An admission, a correction, a restoration. The pen hit the paper softly, but it echoed like a thunderclap. He looked up. The case of Derek Williams will be reopened, effective immediately. All previous findings are hereby vacated pending review. A soft murmur moved through the room, not noise, but something closer to release. In the gallery, people wiped their eyes. A reporter gently lowered her camera, as if capturing the moment felt too intimate. Jamal sat still. No tears, no smile, just silence. Then slowly he stood, his voice low, almost a whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "I never was." He turned to face the courtroom, not just the judge. "I don't want apologies or sympathy. I just want my father remembered as what he truly was. A man, a good man, an innocent man." A pause. Not a case file, not a headline, not a name that disappears into dust. He looked down for a second, then back up. He deserved better, and now, at least, he'll get that. The room held its silence with reverence now. Not out of duty, but out of respect. Because in that courtroom, something rare had just happened. Justice didn't shout. It didn't gloat. It simply stood up and corrected itself. And the boy who made it happen? He didn't need the last word. He'd already said everything that mattered. The courthouse doors swung open with a soft creak, and the sunlight spilled across the marble steps like a quiet benediction. The same boy who had walked in wearing cold steel on his wrists now walked out under warm light, head held high. Jamal stepped outside slowly. No cheering crowd, no camera flashes blinding him. Just the sound of the wind rustling trees and the quiet shifting of feet from those who had watched the impossible unfold inside. He paused at the top of the steps, looked out into a world that hadn't changed much, at least not yet. But he had. He wasn't just the boy who had been accused, or the boy who lost his father. He was the boy who spoke. The one who made them listen. A reporter stepped forward, holding a mic. She didn't push. She didn't rush. "Jamal," she asked gently, "do you feel like you've won?" He thought for a moment, then answered with the same calm clarity that had silenced a courtroom just hours before. "I didn't come here to win," he said. "I came here to be heard." And for the first time, they listened. There was nothing dramatic in his voice, no pride, no bitterness, just truth. He walked down the steps slowly, past officers who now looked away, past strangers who nodded with quiet respect, past the shadows of a system that had once swallowed his father whole. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the voice of a child brave enough to stand in front of power and not flinch. Jamal didn't need a stage or a title or a robe. All he needed was truth and the courage to carry it. And maybe, just maybe, that's how justice begins. Not with applause, not with vengeance, but with a boy standing in the right room at the right time and refusing to stay silent. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, meaningful tales like this one. Stories like Jamal's remind us that justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a robe or carry a badge. Sometimes it's just a voice, a young, brave voice, asking to be heard. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe in the power of storytelling to spark empathy, to challenge the way we see the world, and to remind us of the dignity that every human being deserves. Your support, your likes, your shares, your comments, they're not just numbers, they're fuel. They help us keep creating, keep reaching, and keep telling the kinds of stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. So thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that one voice, maybe even yours, can make a difference. We're Mr. Mac's Stories, and we'll see you in the next one.